My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently?
So, David, I recently kicked off a brand new campaign of Dungeon World called Song of the Shadow Court. It is going well so far. I don't want to talk about the particulars of the campaign just yet. I might do that on a future episode. I wanted to talk about something that happened logistically that I am chewing around in my brain trying to figure out how to solve.
All right, well, what happened?
Yeah, so one of my players, Fraser, he played through the whole first session and then said at the end that he wants to switch his playbook. I am totally cool with that just at the outset. That's fine by me. But I just wanted to talk about, I kind of saw it coming during the session, I could kind of tell that this was going to happen. And I've been trying to figure out, the most efficient way of handling it. Because here's the thing. For Songs of the Shadow Court, I have put a pretty tight restriction on the playbooks that are available to choose from.
Even more so than usual?
Yeah, I think it's 6 total. And they're really specific because I'm going for a really specific vibe on that campaign. And so I have that kind of as a tension point here of I want a really particular kind of thing, but there's a limited number of playbooks. So what do we do? So at the outset, I saw it coming because as we're creating characters, or as we're kind of wrapping up character creation, he goes, "Jason, do I get to pick another move?" I'm like, "No, in Dungeon World, you just get whatever the initial starting moves are." He's like, "Oh yeah, okay, that's right." And then later I asked him, "Hey, what's the name of your animal companion?" It was an owl. And he was like, "Oh, I didn't think of one, hold on, let me think about it." And then a little bit later, I inquired about the owl again in the game. I was like, "Hey, so what's your owl doing right now? And does it have a name yet?" and he was like, "I think I didn't take the owl with me on this mission."
Oh, what? No.
And so I'm hearing this and I'm like, "Oh shit, I think he doesn't really dig the ranger. I don't think he likes it." And I kind of know, because I know Fraser so well, I think I know where this is kind of coming from. And a big part of it is Fraser doesn't have the same handle on fantasy tropes that Dungeon World leans into, like a lot of other people do. And so I don't think he doesn't have all those same pop culture references and touchstones for ranger type characters, And, so if you don't like the animal companion part of the ranger, you're not going to like the ranger, right?
You're really missing out. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big part of it. So I'm trying to think of ways of handling this because I wanted to have a good experience. I mean, I could just say, "Hey, grab a new playbook," but pretty much the only ones that are kind of left are the thief and the fighter. And he's already played a thief for a long time. And the fighter, on paper at least, is not as interesting as the other playbooks in the party. We have the artificer, we have a scion, we have a bard, that improved bard that we talked about a few months ago on the show. And so I kind of get why that may not be super satisfying. Other things I'm thinking about, maybe talk with him specifically about ways of making the fighter a more interesting playbook. Maybe talk about heirloom and the different ways that you can kind of incorporate the signature weapon into the fiction. Things we've talked about on the show before,
So do you have any idea why he decided on the ranger in the first place?
I think he liked the archery aspect and the tracking aspect of the playbook, but those are fairly minor parts of the move set, right? It's really all about the animal.
It's very much about the animal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other things, yeah. I've got other ideas too, maybe letting him take a compendium class with either fighter or ranger, immediately after at level 2.
Sure.
Just let him take it straight away, with no fictional justification. And then the other thing I'm thinking about, which I don't want to do, is loosen the playbook selection restrictions. I might go back to the well on that and see. So it's just something I'm thinking about. Have you ever had that happen?
I can honestly say I've never had a player say, "Oh, I don't like playing this playbook and I want to switch playbooks." I can't say that I've had that happen, but I believe that it does happen. I mean, sure.
Yeah, I think it would be different if I had made wizard or cleric or priest or one of those flashier playbooks available, or druid, right? I think we probably wouldn't be in this place. I know it's on me because I did put such a narrow frame on what they could choose from. But then it makes me wonder if that's the right thing to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with really saying these are the kinds of things that I want. And then just like opening it up to someone who's played a good bit of the game like Fraser has and saying, you know, if there's something else that like kind of fits this mold, letting that in. But I understand why you do it.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is probably get in touch with him on back channels, and I'm probably going to suggest the compendium class route. I think fighter or thief with a very particular kind of compendium class to get like a really specific kind of fun flavor, I think could be a good move. That's kind of where I'm leaning on this. I mean, I'll wait to see what he has to say about the remaining playbook choices and see if he has any thoughts on it. But
right, so you are going for a infiltrator kind of story with this series. Is that right?
It's like a sort of special operatives, almost like fantasy spy thing.
Right. Okay.
A little bit more like Blades in the Dark, like where you're actually like the characters are assumed to be like planning for the adventures and missions rather than just like wandering about in dungeons and, you know, running into things.
Okay. I get you. Well, you know, if you do end up deciding that you are interested in expanding your selection of playbooks, I've actually been playing a playbook recently that might fit your mold. It might not sound like it from the title, but from the moves that it has and the things that it does, it might be something he's interested in.
What is it?
It's called the Swashbuckler Playbook, and it's a part of that pirate campaign that I was playing in. Now I say that you know, the title Swashbuckler might not be what you're looking for, but I'll say this: it doesn't have anything like inherently piratey about it. It's a very competent fighter who fights largely with dexterity-based specialization moves. And that means that he could preserve his kind of ranger-esque ability to attack at distance, but also be very competent with a sword up close, but not have like the signature weapon from the fighter playbook.
That actually sounds like a great fit for the way I know Fraser plays. Fraser loves like cinematic Assassin's Creed style action and combat. And so that actually might be a really good fit. I may have to take a look at that.
Yeah, it's worth looking at if nothing else. It does some interesting things that I might want to talk about on a future episode, how it has some interplay between some of its special moves and the basic moves. But I won't get into that now.
No, it's a great suggestion, though. Anyway, yeah, that's just something that's been on my mind. The session was otherwise fantastic. I mean, everybody had a great time, and Fraser's beef with not liking the playbook is totally legit. I mean, I'm not criticizing that at all. I just, it's definitely something that hasn't happened to me ever, so I'm like, well, I've never had that happen. I don't know what to do when, I've played other Powered by the Apocalypse games where they didn't like a particular move they chose. And so they wanted to switch moves. That's no big deal. Right.
Sure.
But a whole playbook.
Yeah, I've definitely switched moves before. And I have seen this happen where a ranger's pet or animal companion really gets forgotten for vast swaths of the campaign.
Yeah, that is a thing that happens. Yeah.
But yeah, if that's not what he's interested in, then yeah, I don't see a problem switching it out pretty quick here at the beginning, especially. But yeah, anything else?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, let me know how it turns out. But in the meantime, let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For?
So right now in the Dungeon World fandom, there are 3 really active dungeon world based zines, Swordbreaker, Plundergrounds, and Session Zero. Interestingly, all 3 of them are presently on their issue number 5. We have covered Swordbreaker number 5, and we've covered Plundergrounds number 5. And so I thought it would be nice and fair to cover Session Zero number 5 as well.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I remember all of these starting up kind of around the same time. So I guess it makes sense that they'd all be on their issue 5 right now.
Yeah, I think Plundergrounds was the first mover on it. And I want to say, I hope I don't have this wrong, but I want to say Logan got inspired for Swordbreaker because of Plundergrounds, and then same thing with Brian for Session Zero. And of course, they were all inspired by Codex. No, I'm kidding.
They were definitely all inspired by Discern Realities. I'm just saying.
That's true. Yeah, we get shout outs on all 3 of them, which is really nice of them. So Session Zero number 5 is called The Frost Giant's Gambit. This is directly from the text. The Frost Giant's Gambit is essentially a cave delve with 5 areas. An entrance, 3 interior rooms, expandable to 19 interior rooms, and a final chamber holding a Frost Giant's chessboard on which you'll play Giant's chess against the cave's master, Valkamar. The adventure is highly replayable due to tables that randomize the cave, the frozen lair. So that's just kind of a quick overview of what's happening in this particular adventure. The zine generally, I know, and I think we had Logan on a while back who talked about the zine more broadly, is about interesting or unique ways of kicking off an adventure of Dungeon World, right? And in that context, the zine is super interesting. Things I liked about it: the structure of the zine is really fun. I can't recall if this is true for every issue, but I know it's definitely the case for this one. But each of the sections is named after different Dungeon World moves, and they each cover different types of material. So there's a section called Discern Realities, which is a starter that uses the questions from Discern Realities to kind of set up the initial disposition of the adventure. Very similar to Dirk's thing that we covered last week. Spout Lore, which is a full, proper adventure front for that particular adventure. Defy Danger is the bulk of the zine. In this case, it contains all the locations, monsters, and custom moves and things you'll need. And then Last Breath, which is Brian's closing thoughts about the adventure, including a number of considerations when getting ready to run it.
Gotta love a cute format.
I know, yeah. Obviously, we're super into cute formats here at the Gauntlet, right? I think it's a fun one. Other things I thought were really neat about this issue: the Giant's chess sequence is super interesting. It's like this abstract sort of custom move that lets you play a chess match against the Frost Giant, and it uses like you do this custom move and you're gathering hold and then you spend hold to win the match, right? Not totally dissimilar to, say, the Labyrinth move, right? Where you're collecting hold to accomplish a thing in the fiction. Super interesting. I would definitely need to play it to see how it goes. I'd want to play test that a little bit, but on paper, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, on paper, it's interesting because it seems like it's very reminiscent of the chess match scene in the first Harry Potter, where you have one player who's kind of directing the action and trying to win the chess match, and then the other players are taking roles as pieces. And how it's different than Harry Potter is it seems that they are actually, the other players will be pushing the pieces around the board and then having to defend themselves from the enemy pieces as they try to attack and things. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a neat idea. It looks really good in my mind, right? Like when I was reading through the zine, I was like, oh, this seems like a fun set piece encounter, right?
Yeah.
Another thing I thought was really great about this issue of Session Zero, I like the variety of monsters available. They're all sort of like polar, ice-based monsters, but there's a really good mix of mundane creatures like animals, as well as like actual proper monsters, including like some classic D&D monsters like a Remmer has. So that was pretty neat. I was going through that and I was like, oh, if this is pretty great to pick up just for this, honestly, because it's a really nice, wide, comprehensive selection of ice environment monsters.
I agree. The whole thing, from setup to how you create the randomized dungeon and what is going to inhabit the dungeon. And then there's a sequence with, some, the frozen chess pieces being like captives and things like that. It's very OSR feeling, and which is a kind of a fun, different way of looking at a Dungeon World specific adventure starter.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I was a little unsure about. I've got a couple of points that kind of flagged in my mind as things I'm not totally 100% certain about. Mind you, I've never run anything out of Session Zero, so I haven't had a chance to really like play with Brian's approach, whereas I have run stuff out of, say, Plundergrounds, for example. It is very sort of OSR in its presentation, I think. It has lots of tables and things that you use to populate the dungeon, and I don't think that's necessarily against the way you're supposed to do Dungeon World, because Dungeon World does say draw maps, populate them, but leave spaces. But it's not really my approach. Like when I was going through it, I thought it was really cool and it did feel very OSR, but it's not how I would design a dungeon. And so I would definitely need to get my hands on that to see if it was something that I actually enjoyed doing,
Yeah, I understand that.
I will say though, in its favor, Brian includes a sample setup as well as like a worksheet that you can use to populate the adventure. So that's pretty handy. It's kind of a neat idea.
Yeah, I mean, all of that just goes to the well-produced nature of this. It has good art, it has good layout, it has a cute layout. for titles, and then it has a good way of kind of managing its own instructions so that you can have something to use at the table that goes beyond the text.
Yeah, and it definitely needs it, right? Because it is a bit more involved than, say, like a dungeon starter, like the kinds that we produce in Codex or we talk about sometimes on the show. Like, it's definitely like, it's a couple steps more involved in terms of like GM prep. And so I like that he's thought about the tools for that. Another thing that, like, as I was reading through it that I'm not 100% sure on, I think in some places, I think Brian's understanding of how Dungeon World works is a little bit different from mine. It diverges a little bit. There's one particular part where he sets up like, there's some kind of like challenge or encounter or trap or something. I can't remember exactly what it was.
It's the entrance to the place.
Yeah, it was some environmental thing. And he has like a little table that says, like, it lists out the different ways that the group can approach it along with a stat. And then he suggests that, like, you do a defy danger and roll that stat depending on which way they approach it. But that is a little bit counterintuitive to how I run Dungeon World, which is I just present the problem and then let the players tell me what they're doing. And then we figure out the stat. This idea of like sort of predetermined defy dangers was a bit of a weird fit for me in my brain. I don't know if it does or does not work, but it's definitely something that I was like, I don't know about that. Again, something I would have to like kind of see. I think Brian's approach to Dungeon World is definitely, it's interesting. It's different from mine for sure.
Yeah. So the thing with the entrance and the thing with some different pieces of how the whole dungeon gets established, the randomized nature of it actually informs the stats and the character of the big bad at the end, which is very interesting to me. And part of that is predetermining the entrance and which stat is likely to be used to overcome the challenge. So, like, I think there's one where you have to swim underneath frozen water to get to the other side, and that's the way in. And now that doesn't mean that your players couldn't come up with other ways, but he has predetermined, like, that's probably going to be a con roll, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But like, if your players decided to come at it from a different way, I wouldn't, automatically say, well, it's still a con roll.
Yeah. To the extent that you just take it as a suggestion or like inspiration or ideas, I think it's totally cool, right? This is not totally out of bounds in the sense that I have worked with Ray Otis, who produces Plundergrounds, on moves that, like something he wrote for Codex once. He wrote this starter for Codex once where there's like this sort of floating head golem thing that's kind of the final boss of the starter, or like this sort of major big bad of the starter. And you ask certain questions at the beginning to the players, and then you incorporate the answers into the monster's move, right? And so you're kind of like building the monster as you play. And Ray's done that in Plundergrounds too before, like where a lot of the initial setup stuff informs what the villain looks like, right? Like down to mechanically, like down to the moves that it can do, right? And so this is not totally unheard of, by any means. Just something I wanted to kind of point out.
Right. And back to what I was kind of alluding to earlier, where the way in the entrance will kind of tell you something about the big bad at the end. If you determine, or if you randomly select that the way in is through an underground entrance that leads like underwater, where you would likely have to make a con roll to get in. That tells you that the boss's monster has more HP than he would normally have. So that's just kind of an example of what I was talking about.
Yeah, cool. Just to kind of wrap it up here, I do think that Session 0, as listed on the tin, it's all about like interesting, unique ways to approach the beginning of a campaign of Dungeon World, and in that sense, I think it's super interesting and very and worth picking up. I think it's like $2.99 on drive-thru for a 32-page zine with art and layout and stuff. So, not some major, like, there's no reason not to try it out, right? And I want to say there's some free issues of Session 0 somewhere too. But
I think the rest of them are listed on Drive-Thru RPG and our Pay What You Want. So if you're thinking about running them, maybe check out the earlier ones. And if you like what you see, you can pick this one up for $2.99.
Cool. That's all I got.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be.
I want to talk about making use the best use of your time with the moves make camp and take watch.
That sounds good, because I was thinking about talking about the same thing.
Yeah, so we have talked about make camp in other contexts before on the show, so some of this will be review, but I think it's worth saying again because, in my games of Dungeon World, the adventure's great. The players love it. The mystery's great. The fights, are enjoyable, fast, and deadly. All that stuff is really great. But a lot of times what they really want to do is just get to make camp. They want to get to the in-between scenes, the scenes that let them talk to each other, the scenes that let them explore their characters' backgrounds a little bit more, right? My table they happen to like in-character dialogue. They happen to enjoy, party dynamics and exploring those things. And so, I always want to make the most out of make camp. In my games, it's not just, oh, you guys are about to die, so you better make camp so you can get your hit points back. Okay, that's done. Now let's continue on. It's not really that.
Yeah, I have a similar experience where the players that I usually have with me when I'm running, they want these moments where they can just talk in their voices or however they perceive their character, and get in and mix it up with the other characters in these moments. And they don't have that all the time when they're in a combat or anything like that.
It's hard in the dungeon, right?
It is. With city-based adventures, it's easier, but usually you're not making camp in city-based adventures because they can do that. But there's so many other things that you can use to make camp a better scene. Even for players who are not used to that, they'll realize that, hey, this might be something that I enjoy, so that I can explore my backstory and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for both moves, I've divided my notes up into considerations before doing that move, and then considerations during the move itself, like during the fictional part of the move. And so why don't we just start with make camp?
Sure.
Considerations before make camp. Here's what I have down in my notes. First of all, I think this doesn't happen enough, and I don't do it enough either. I probably should. Give them a chance to search for a safe place to make camp. Alternatively, this is a really nice option for an unrelated discern realities roll, for what is useful or valuable. So they're looking at something else and they ask what here is useful or valuable. And maybe you just tell them, hey, over there's a really great, safe, defensible point to make camp. They may not have been looking for that, but it's the kind of thing that, adds, it's helpful to them. And also it kind of adds some texture to the world,
Yeah.
So if they do, give them a chance to find a good spot to make camp. And if they're good at that, if they say they get a successful DR or something like that, then they don't even have to do take watch at all, right? They do it in the fiction, but not the role.
Right. I like that because you can also use that as a means of saving your players some grief if it looks like they're really struggling. They've just gotten out of a fight, but they're really trying to dig around for cool magic items that might be on these goblins. And you're like, there's no magic items on these goblins, but these guys need to heal up. What's here is useful or valuable to me. Hey, here's a great spot for you to make camp.
Yep. There's an alcove in the cave wall just big enough for all of you. And you can, that kind of thing. Easy to defend. I have a feeling this doesn't happen much in games of Dungeon World, and so I just want to kind of flag that as something you should be thinking about. Another consideration before you actually fire off the make camp move. If you're using flags, or if you are trying to resolve a bond, whatever the hell that means, see if your upcoming make camp would be a nice time to frame up some scenes towards that end, right?
Right. And I think that's a good thing for experienced players to be doing for themselves. On a GM note, this is a great time to ask your players, hey, we're about to make camp. And for all of this, I would suggest offering out some questions, pointing out the flags or bonds, whichever you happen to use, and then saying, let's take 5 and think about what making camp would look like. And then, as the GM, go away from that time, take those few minutes and think about all the other things your players might need to be doing while they think about their flags and interacting with the other characters.
Yeah, that's beautiful advice. I often do that as well. I purposely actively talk about framing up scenes to hit flags, and make camp is just a terrific opportunity for it. And you're right. Taking a break, putting that on the table, then taking a short break, give everybody a chance to think about it a little bit. That's going to lead to some dynamite role playing. You're setting yourself up for some really, really terrific role playing. So definitely do that. I agree.
Yeah. And what I mean when I say, you know, they've come up with the things that they want to talk about for flags and bonds and whatever questions you've already posed to them. And then what's the GM going to be thinking about? Well, in the middle of their scene that they're having, in the middle of them trying to resolve the bond or the flag, suggest to them things that they might need to be doing while they're making camp. If they're a ranger, how are you taking care of your pet? If you are a wizard, what are you doing to refresh your spells? If you're a cleric, how are you communing with your god in this time? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can even take it one step further and ask things that invite the other players into those scenes. How is his taking care of the animal really bothering you? Who keeps making obnoxious somethings as they're trying to commune with their god? You know, that kind of thing.
Or what do you think about their god? What do you think about the way he's, you know, performing his communing or rituals right now? Yeah, just anything like that. I like to stir up controversy. Party. I love all that. Yeah, that's terrific. Like, absolutely. Like, don't waste the time, right? Like, Make Camp is coming up. Think about all that stuff. It's an invitation to think about all that stuff. So let's talk about during Make Camp, like during the actual fiction part of it. Like, the characters are at camp. They've struck their fire. They've made their fire. And, what do we do then? So again, this is just a follow-up on what we've been saying. A terrific opportunity to add texture to the player characters and the party dynamics. So, for example, use questions, like David just said, directed at the players to get things going. Ask about how they're feeling about something intense that just happened. When they answer, ask them what their character is physically doing at camp to reflect that inner turmoil, right? If you have a fallen comrade, ask what they are doing during camp to memorialize them or remember them. Ask player characters about other characters. What does this person do at camp that is really annoying? What do they do that is really sweet or admirable? How do you know that incident X is on their mind? Just press them, you know, like that's what David was saying earlier too, like kind of press them, like pull that stuff out. That's how role playing happens. That's how great scenes happen. Right.
So I think this is really where Jason and I kind of have a directorial approach to making role playing happen. And I have no problem if my players are clicking and they're making it happen for themselves. I just watch. I sit back and watch, and then I occasionally will come in with a question. But if they're having a hard time, if they're new to this concept, that's when you want to start pressing them with more and more of these questions until they get used to it and your GMing style, if this is the GMing style that you choose. And I'm telling you, if you do this, you're going to have richer characters that your players are more in love with.
All right, well, let's talk about Take Watch. So, Take Watch, the main thing that happens here is, does something approach camp, and then have them roll to see if they detect it on time, right? On paper, very functional, not super interesting. Make Camp is also not super interesting on paper. It's highly functional, not super interesting. Kind of like Undertake a Perilous Journey. A lot of the special moves are very, very utilitarian, you know?
Right.
Considerations before Take Watch. Is there something that an individual character needs to follow up on that is kind of inconvenient to do during the adventure? Take Watch is a terrific opportunity to get those things done, such as investigating a treasure they found, doing some book research, enchanting items if you're a wizard, preparing rituals, setting traps if you're a ranger, set traps so that you don't have to worry about rations next time, maybe even scouting ahead a little bit depending on the circumstances of your Make Camp. All of those things are things that the character on watch can be doing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's totally legit, especially to get some of those spout lores kind of on the table about magic items that they found. If you're not the kind of GM who just likes to tell them.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any thoughts about, like, during Take Watch? Any other thoughts?
I'll often ask, like, what are you doing to stay awake during, like, the wee hours of the night or things like that, just for some color. But it's not as pragmatic as kind of some of these, like, let's take care of some of this business while we're taking care of business questions.
Yeah. During Take Watch, I think, is a great opportunity to again add some texture to things, like to really, really show some textures, show some different nuances of a character's personality. I sometimes ask the character on watch, especially if I know there's no danger coming and they might not otherwise have anything to do on their watch. Instead of just letting their watch pass without incident, I sometimes ask things like, what are you thinking about while you sit there alone by the fire, with follow-up questions as needed? How do you feel about incident X that just happened, right? Tell me about where you came from, that kind of thing. Do your people observe some kind of nighttime custom or ritual? Just things like that,
Yeah, that's nice. I like that. One other thing I will say about just take watch in general as a practical matter. Don't make every single watch have something happen. You'll be stuck doing things at night all night long.
It's true. Yeah. That's actually a great coda to this. Danger doesn't always have to come up in the night, right? And that's really where it's on you as the GM to consider the pacing of your story, right? Like if you have got to finish this 4-room dungeon by the end of this session, you need to be mindful of stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely using your take watch and make camp to explore scenes can help with your pacing if you are under time constraints or under we will only have this many sessions to complete this adventure. This is a good way of deciding when we'll use more or less time for exploring the characters. That's all I had to say about it. Anything else from you?
No, I think I'm good.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here is Useful or Valuable to Me?
Okay, so we have 2 more selections from our Keepers of the Gauntlet Dungeon World contest. I have chosen one, so has David. I will say at the outset that the one I chose, I like it very much, but I also chose it because I want to gently criticize it.
All right, I'll try and hold you back.
Please do. My choice is called The Weeping Cells. It was written by James Hardy. Here it goes. The men of the North claim the world was made from the corpse of a giant, killed treacherously by his divine children who wanted a new world to adventure on. Others scoff at the story, but those outlanders who've seen the Weeping Cells sometimes wonder if the story is not so implausible after all. In a cave high on Mount Valathorn, overlooking the great city that took its name, miners found that under a thin layer of rock was thick bone around an enormous empty cavern. They have unearthed a hole in the structure, which they attest to be an eye socket of the giant's skull. The energy inside this skull made climbing down to explore it impossible, but they found a use for it. They built an iron cage which, with stout chains and winches, could lower a prisoner into the void. Anyone in the cell is overwhelmed with sorrow, pain, and betrayal, as the remnants of the creature's feelings are far too big for a tiny human to withstand. It makes for an impressive interrogation/torture technique. Here's the move part. If you've convinced the priests who guard the cave to let you utilize it, or found the other eye hole somewhere on the far side of the mountain, lower your prisoner and roll plus wisdom. On a 10+, they spill, answering every question you have as honestly as they are able. On a 7 to 9, they also answer, but their time inside is overwhelming them, making them distant and their answers short and muddled. Can you figure out what my criticism of this is?
I mean, I don't know. It's pretty terrible thing to do to an NPC, I guess. It would kind of presuppose that your characters are evil. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I like it. I love everything leading up to the custom move, and the custom move itself is totally utilitarian and practical. But I think the far more interesting thing here is what happens if you go down in the cage.
Oh, if you end up down there.
Yeah. I think that's the more interesting thing for me here. If I go in the cage, for whatever reason, if I go in the cage and I'm lowered down into the skull, what happens to me? I
mean, you're overwhelmed with sorrow, pain, and betrayal.
Right, but what does that look like as a move, though, right? Do I also learn something? Is there some kind of, do I get to take some of that with me and use it in some way in the future? I really quite like the move. I like the evocative, descriptive bits leading up to the custom move, leading up to the actual mechanical part. But I was also like, oh man, I really want to know the reverse.
Man, I would not go down there. That's my answer. Why would you go down there?
But what if you had to, though? There might be a reason why you have to go down there, right? That's what I'm saying. This assumes you had to go down there for some reason.
Yeah, it'd probably just be a defy danger wisdom unless you wrote a separate custom move for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that, I guess, it's beautiful and evocative. I really like it. And it definitely invites the custom move to be written. But yeah, I can see why you would wish that the more likely outcome of the player ending up down there, as opposed to them dragging an NPC there and dropping them in, happen to be written here. But yeah, it's really well written.
What's your pick?
So my pick is the Revenant Chord from Blake Ryan. And he writes, "A Revenant Chord is a nefarious piece of music that must be played on a harp during winter solstice with hands wet with blood from 6 different creatures. Bards and necromancers whisper about the existence of this piece of music, and some claim to have heard a piece of it and been struck dumb with its power. If you play the chord, roll plus charisma. On a 10+, pick 1 with no retaliation. On a 7 to 9, pick 1, but once finishing their task, they come for you. And then on a 6-, the music deems you unworthy. Choose which hand is devoured by your harp." Now, the pick 1 from the 10+ and the 7 to 9, you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation of these creatures. I know what they are, but I don't know how to say them.
Okay. We'll see how it goes.
You're either going to end up with a D6 of morgues.
Morgue, that's how I say that, yeah.
Okay. Which will undertake 1 task for you. That is 13 days or less to complete. 2d6 drorgs.
Draugrs, I think. Draugrs, yeah. Or drogas, I suppose.
Drogas?
That's what Garrett played in We Hunt the Keepers.
He played a droga?
Right, yeah. It's like a kind of dwarf.
So it ends with an R and you say it droga?
I don't know. I may be wrong here. Maybe it's not.
I have no idea.
No, actually, I might be wrong here. I think it's an undead thing. Fuck, I don't know. I lose my D&D cred card. So.
2d6 droga, which will also undertake 1 task that is 13 days or less to complete, or 4d6 zombies will undertake 1 task that is 13 days or less to complete. So basically, you're playing this awful thing on a harp, and if you do it right, some undead show up and will help you, and then hopefully not come and hunt you. Also, if you screw up, your hand gets eaten.
I actually almost picked this one too. I quite like it. It's fun. I think it's a fun move. It has like a nice little, there's like a little bit of danger there. And the outcome is pretty good though, right? Being able to summon like these numbers of undead is pretty cool. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I like it. And this is one of the more rare instances where I really like the 6- being defined, because I feel like it's already really dangerous for them to use this, even if it goes well for them, that the 6- is like, okay, let's just go ahead and hammer that one out so we know what's going to happen. Your hand's going to get destroyed.
Right, yeah. Well, and on the mid result, the things can turn on you too, right?
Like they do. Yeah. They do, in fact, turn on you. And it's not just
danger
one.
With using this move, yeah. I like a 6- on a custom move like this, right? I think that's an appropriate place for a 6- to be defined.
Yeah, it's very good. That's my pick.
Awesome. Contest is still ongoing, folks. You have until March 1st. You can submit as many entries as you wish. You're going to find the list of Gauntlet Keeper names, which is on the website. Choose something that is inspiring you. Write a magic item or a custom move or a monster based off those choices, and paste the text into one of the G+ posts of our show, or you can email them to gauntletpodcast@gmail.com. 250 words max, please. Winners will receive, the winner will receive $25 and be invited to co-host an episode of the show. Up to 2 runners-up will get $25 each.
Awesome. Let's move on to our next segment.
Hi, listeners. 2 things I want to tell you about today. First, we are giving away 3 softcover copies of Emily Care Boss's game, The Romance Trilogy, in February. For a chance to win one, all you have to do is follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. Our Twitter followers will be entered into drawings taking place on February 14th, 21st, and 28th. And we're doing these Twitter drawings all year, so be sure to follow us at GauntletRPG. The second thing I want to tell you about is the new issue of Codex. It's called Codex Blood 2, and it will be in our Patreon feed through February. It is the best issue of Codex yet. Here's what's inside. Dia de los Muertos, which are procedures for a 4-session gaming event involving the final girl and choose your own adventure. 5 more blood-soaked magic items for Dungeon World. The Croatoa, a dark and intense OSR scenario. Our newest Gauntlet daddy, Fang Bang, and 3 dozen cult horror movies. To get access to Codex Blood 2, just make a $4 pledge on the Gauntlet Patreon by February 28th. As a bonus, you'll also get the original Codex Blood. So go to patreon.com/gauntlet and check it out. Thanks.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen? Listeners, this is the ongoing adventure of St. Evelyn the White, also known as the Mad Saint. When we last saw her, she was conversing with a homeless man who was missing his legs, and she generously gave him some food, and also somewhat generously offered to help him through his plight. He declined and made his way away where he was going to help his wife to some of the food that St. Evelyn gave him. The town is in disarray as the army has returned. Men and women have come out from everywhere to see who the survivors are and to mourn the lost. And St. Evelyn is looking for a place to stay. St. Evelyn, the only obvious tavern here, has a sign on it that has a musical note, a root vegetable, and then like a wheat thing on the sign. It looks like the windows are boarded up as the glass has been broken, but you can see light coming from inside and hear the soft playing of some kind of musical instrument. What do you do?
I go inside. Music, vegetables, and such sound like what I need right now. I go in.
All right. Inside, you find that it is an inn, as it appeared to be from the outside. There is just one skinny, lanky, tall man sitting on a one-riser stage playing a half-harp pretty lazily. There's no one behind the bar, and he greets you in what appears to be kind of an improv sort of greeting. Like, it doesn't seem like he's like a regular here or anything. He's just, well, I suppose that you came to the Beaten Barley for my music.
I say yes. Are you the proprietor of this establishment?
No. Marlene went out. She went out to see if her husband is still alive. And you see him his eyes kind of get a little bit excited at the prospect of Marlene's husband not being alive.
Sir, I couldn't help but notice that you had a bit of a twinkle in your eye when you said that. Do you hope that Marlene comes back with bad news?
Oh, I wouldn't go around town saying something like that. And he's playing a very lively, happy song and tune right now. But between you and me, it could be just what I need.
My name is Evelyn the White. What is your name, sir?
They call me Zegan. Evelyn the White. How did you manage to keep your clothes so clean with all the ash?
I am a servant of the church. Perhaps the gods reached down and placed a divine protective nimbus around my person to prevent the ash from touching my clothes.
He begins playing a kind of soft hymn on his half-lute, or his half-harp, and he says, yes, I'm sure the gods were so interested in keeping your clothes clean and white, yet they do not seem especially concerned with keeping the virtues of those around here particularly white, nor do they perhaps seem interested in keeping even the innocent around here fed.
Oh, perhaps the people around here are filled with sin. Perhaps they are not worthy of the grace of the gods.
Perhaps they are. And he begins playing that same upbeat, happy song he was playing at first.
A friend, there are not many people around right now. For whom are you playing?
Oh, I play for my own amusement when I cannot manage to get coin from it. But I shall stop if you are saying you will flee or that you will not stay if I cannot glean coin from my craft.
No, continue. Please play, but perhaps you could play a little song for me. A little song inspired by the work I do.
Oh?
That would be most interesting, I think.
Put down a coin and we'll see about it.
I shall put down 2.
Excellent. And then he doesn't even ask you what you do or what your particular deity is. He just begins playing. And he accurately describes whatever the worst thing is that you would consider you have done in your life. What is that thing or that act?
He sings a song of a child who was born with a terrible deformity and who lived with a great deal of pain. And he sings a song of how I came into the child's life with the intention of easing their passage into the arms of the gods as a way of alleviating their pain. But I allowed myself to be talked out of it by the child's mother, and I have lived with the guilt of that for many years, because there was only one answer, an answer that the child's father understood very well. Only one way of making the situation right, doing what the gods would have us do, answering the challenge that they put before us. But I did not honor my vows.
And Zegan ends strumming softly and just kind of proposing to the room, though it is empty. And the lights seem to have dimmed, and your vision become more focused on him as he has played. And yet, Saint Evelyn could not her own precepts keep. She stayed her hand when she could have brought the sweet release. Strums one last time, and the lights seem to come back to life. As the door bursts open, and a crying young woman comes in, holding her hand to her face, and walks behind the bar, composes herself, and turns to you. We can wrap it up there. That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of the Gauntlet gaming community. We can be found on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for the Gauntlet. You will find us there. We are on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. Our Twitter is very active right now, very hopping. So go follow us on Twitter. Where else are we at? We're on Patreon at patreon.com/Gauntlet, and we have a website, gauntlet-rpg.com, where you can learn about all the different things we do in the Gauntlet, including the other podcasts we produce, the Codex Zine, Gauntlet Con, and Gauntlet Hangouts.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.